Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome an expert of a different kind, someone who's specialized in addiction and recovery. From South Carolina, USA, Amber Hollingsworth. Amber, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ash. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Amber is an addiction recovery specialist and a content creator. So, Amber, before we come to addiction and recovery, a few questions for you. What inspired you to dedicate your life to addiction recovery and family support?
Well, actually, Ash, I feel like most people that are in my field ended up here very much on purpose, and I got here on accident.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you just land where you're supposed to be. I came from an addicted family,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not really what inspired me to be here. I honestly just got thrown in an internship in grad school, and
Wow.
it just suited me, and I
Mm.
stayed, and I love
Wow.
it.
Wow. Uh, Founding Hope for Families Recovery Center must have been a big step. What was your vision
Yes.
when you began?
Well, prior to that, I'd worked in a private psychiatric hospital, like a rehab for almost 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And when you work in a place like that, you see that it becomes like a revolving door, and it's the same people in and out, in and out. And you start to see the inefficiencies and
Mm.
the places where the system really doesn't work.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
my thought was to help bridge the gap a little bit, particularly with the family piece,
Mm.
which really seemed to be missing in addiction recovery service.
Mm. Mm. Amazing. And what personal qualities or life experiences do you think helped you connect so deeply with both families and individuals in recovery?
I think a little bit of it is because I come from an addicted family. Grandparents, parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, addiction was everywhere in my life.
Mm.
But I think the thing that really helps me, honestly, which is kind of crazy because I think it's because I'm not in recovery myself.
Mm. Mm.
It forced me to have to listen harder
Mhm.
and watch closer and really, really pay attention to what people were telling me.
Right.
Because when you're in recovery, it's easy to really just project your story onto other people. And I didn't have that.
Mm.
So I had to really, really, really listen to the people that I was working with to
Yeah.
understand them and their
Mm.
situation. I think it's kind of like if you have a disability, how you might get a different superpower. Like if you
Correct.
can't see, your hearing might be really good. I feel
Mhm.
like that's the way it worked for me.
Amazing. Let's talk of addiction and recovery now. How do you explain the nature of addiction to families who are struggling to understand the behavior of their loved ones?
The reason why addiction is so difficult to understand the behaviors of people who have addiction is because addiction messes up the motivation center of someone's
Mm.
brain. And
Mm.
so normal things that would motivate a regular person just don't get through to a person who has an addiction.
Mm.
And it feels like nothing works. And it looks like this person doesn't care about other people, that they're selfish or that they don't
Mm.
have empathy.
Mm.
But really, those are symptoms of the addiction.
And for my viewers and listeners, how would you define addiction?
The simple way to put it is it's just continuing to do something despite the fact that it's messing up your life and you just keep
Mm.
doing it anyway over and
Mm.
over. Just doesn't make sense logically.
Correct. What are some of the biggest misconceptions you encounter about addiction and recovery?
The biggest ones I run into is this idea that people have to hit bottom to get better.
Hmm.
There's this notion out there, particularly families are told that someone just has to suffer long enough and then they'll have this like wake up
Mm.
moment and then they'll
Wow.
decide they want recovery and they'll want it for themselves. But in my experience, that's not exactly the way it works.
Amazing. Your invisible intervention method is quite unique. Tell me
Mhm.
about this method, and how would you explain it in simple terms for all our viewers and listeners?
Well, the reason I call it invisible is because it's behind the scenes and the person will likely never even know it happened, as
Mm.
opposed to like what you see on TV, which is this big confrontation where everyone in the family confronts this person, reads these letters, and puts out these ultimatums. This is more of a behind the scenes way of helping a person get motivated to get better for themselves. It's to find their internal, true core motivators as a human and pull those forward as opposed to forcing the idea onto someone.
What signs should a family look for to know that it's time to use an intervention strategy for an addiction?
I think if your loved one has addictive behaviors, but they're still functioning and they haven't lost everything, like they're still going to work and they're still holding together a lot of their daily activities, then I would probably use something more like the invisible intervention. Because if you try to force someone who's functioning into rehab or recovery, they don't really see that it's that big of a problem yet. And so it's not ultimately going to work. If your loved one is spiraling out of control and they're homeless and they're very dependent and you're worried they're going to die any day or hurt someone else, then I would probably go with a more traditional kind of intervention because it's more of a crisis mode. And that kind of person is not in denial. They just can't stop. And so sometimes when you can force them into a situation where they have to stop, their brain will clear up and they will actually get recovery if you can keep them sobered up long enough.
And when you talk of or you work with people who have addiction challenges, what are the age groups that you have handled?
Early in my career, I worked with teenagers, which was, I call that the deep end of the ocean. That was the hardest thing ever.
Yeah.
And I've worked a lot with young people. These days, I tend to work a lot more with adults. I see a lot of very high functioning alcoholics, like businessmen who drink too much. I see a lot of doctors, a lot of lawyers who are very high functioning, but it's definitely taking a toll in their life. They're headed in the wrong direction.
Because someone was telling me when I was speaking to them that there's another form of addiction that seems to be challenging a lot of the young, which is a digital addiction.
Right.
And, your digital screens, including someone told me a 20-year-old had an addiction to online gambling.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit more about how does your process of invisible intervention actually work with so many of these challenges?
The good news is that addiction really is addiction across the board, no matter what you're addicted to.
Absolutely right.
As far as how it works inside the person and as far as how to help someone. So it's not even so much about what someone's addicted to. It's about connecting to someone's true sense and what they really care about and how to pull that back forward to kind of remind them of who do they really want to be and reconnect them to their values and their motivation.
And as if one looks at from a science perspective, is there some kind of neurological matter that tends to accelerate addiction?
For sure. A lot of people say addiction is a disease. And sometimes I'll use that language because it is helpful in the way that it destigmatizes it. But the truth of it is that addiction is occurring in someone's brain long before the brain changes happen. So it's not like you have this disease and you become addicted. It's more like you become addicted and it causes these brain changes eventually, which causes a lot of neurological differences and psychological changes.
Well said. Amber, why do you believe empathy and understanding are as important as boundaries in helping someone to recover?
Because what happens in family systems is, and this is a natural instinct, when you have a loved one who's going, down the wrong path, it's like watching someone run in front of a train, and your natural instinct is to want to stop them and get their attention and say, "What are you doing? You're ruining your life. You're messing up our lives." But when you do that, the person with the addiction sees you as the villain because they see you as being critical and not understanding. And so all of their attention goes on battling with you, like this power struggle. And you get into this cat and mouse game, and they fixate on how you're not fair and you're being mean and you're judging them and you're trying to control them. And all of that can go on for years, and it distracts them from what the real issue is. So you have to move out of that villain role so someone can see what's actually happening. It's like a
Mm.
distraction when you're
Yeah,
trying to do those other ways.
yeah, yeah. Well said. You also talk about relapse as a part of recovery.
Yes.
Why is it so important to reframe it this way?
Because recovery and sobriety is really a learning process, just like anything else in our life. And
Mm,
it takes everyone several times to really get it. And
mm,
people are going to try a lot of things to get better that aren't going to work. I call it
mm.
bargaining.
Yeah.
They're going to try to cut back, or they're going to try to just do this substance and not that substance, or only on weekends,
Mm,
or a lesser concentrated alcohol, something like that.
mm,
Um, and people, when the family's looking at that, they're seeing it as you're not even trying, you don't even care, you're just lying, you're saying you're trying to get better. But really, it's a learning process. And
mm,
if you'll just let people go through that learning process, you can speed it up. When you engage in that power struggle, again, you're slowing the whole thing down
mm,
because then they get really determined to prove you wrong, and they just keep trying these bargains longer and longer and longer.
Wow. How can families maintain hope and patience during the ups and downs of recovery?
I think one of the things you can do as a family member is guard yourself from a lot of outside negativity,
Mm,
because the other people in your life are going to be telling you what you should and shouldn't do, and that you shouldn't put up with this, and you should draw these hard lines, and people don't get better, and you have to wait till they hit bottom. And
mm,
so it causes you as the family member to feel even more torn because you
mm,
constantly feel like, am I doing the wrong thing? Am I enabling them? And you feel all of this guilt and this hopelessness when
mm.
actually I see people get better from this thing every
Yeah.
day. In
Mm,
fact, in my experience, a person's chances of getting better is more hinged on the family's response than whether or not they get it at the time.
mm,
Like if I
mm.
can train a family, I can get someone sober.
Well said. How has the recovery landscape changed and evolved over the years with increased awareness and online support communities?
I think there's a lot more roads to recovery these days.
Mm, mm,
In the way past, it's just seen as a bad behavior or a moral character issue. And then you sort of moved into like a traditional 12-step model, which is um, it's more of a religious spiritual way to do it, which I'm a fan of. But now
mhm,
there's all kinds of ways, and so there you can find a path that fits for each person.
mm. And with the onset of so much technology and so much of AI and so much of knowledge available, is technology now an aid for supporting recovery?
I think so, because it allows people who maybe are in an earlier stage
Mm,
of, maybe I want to make a change or I want to get some help, but I'm not to the point where I want to walk into rehab or
mm,
go to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting because I'm just not sure. It
mm,
gives you a way to start to get some resources, like listening to a podcast or watching a
mm,
YouTube video or
mm,
talking with an AI about your
mm,
situation
mm.
when you're not sure you want to announce that to everyone. It gives you kind of a private way to
Yeah.
start the process.
Mm. How can families rebuild trust after years of addiction related conflict? And give me an example if you can.
Sure. When families get stuck in the cycles of addiction, there becomes trust issues on both sides. So naturally, we think, well, the family doesn't trust the person with the addiction, and that's kind of obvious.
Mm,
But the person with the addiction also doesn't trust the family equally as much
mm,
because
mm,
there's been sneaking and lying on both sides. So
mm,
the addict has been chasing their addiction, and the family has been chasing the addict. And they've been secretly spying and controlling and sneaking and talking to outside people, trying to get those people. And so there's this lack of boundaries on both sides.
mm,
And so if each side can kind of back up and look at where I call it their side of the street, and keep their energy and responsibilities on their side of the street and not trying to control the other
mm,
sides,
mm,
that's really the first step to healing
mm,
all the distrust.
mm. Clearly, there's no place for I told you so.
No,
Yep.
it's not very helpful,
I
anyways.
completely agree with you. My next question, Amber, is how can we teach children or young adults to develop resilience and self awareness around the risk of addiction?
I think traditionally, one of the ways we do that is we try to, I call it scare tactics. We try to scare them and tell them horror stories, but that doesn't work on young people because young people naturally feel invincible, and they think, well, that wouldn't happen to me, because they haven't had enough bad things happen to them yet.
Yeah.
You can scare adults because we've had bad things and we think, yeah, that could happen to me, but not kids.
Correct.
But if you can explain to them what the addiction pattern looks like, and it's not so much like, don't do this drug, it's going to kill you. It's more like, don't do this drug, you might like it too much. And then you're going to start prioritizing it over everything else, and kind of explain to them what that looks like so that if it happens to them, they'll see it much earlier in the process.
Very interesting. Time for two more questions for you. And this is about your podcast, Put the Shovel Down. I can see the signage behind you. What motivated you to start your YouTube channel, Put the Shovel Down? And tell me a little bit about the channel and what's the response been like?
Sure. Initially, I just threw some videos on YouTube because I would be in session with clients and they would say, man, I wish I had that on recording. And I would find that I would say, the same 15 things over and over and over. And then I thought one day, I was like, well, I could record that. This was, in the earlier days of YouTube. And I threw some videos up there just to be able to give the links to my clients so that I wouldn't have to, do the whole brain talk all the time or, the same talks. And that's the way I initially got started with it. It wasn't really to get new audience. It was just as a resource for my clients. But eventually more and more and more people were looking for those resources. And I realized that it was a missed opportunity to help people who weren't getting help. And a lot of those people were the family members. There's almost nothing out there for the family.
Yeah. It's often said that the caregiver needs a lot of attention.
They're the ones that are suffering. They're the ones that are looking for help. And everywhere they go, they're being told there's nothing you can do. Just step back and cross your fingers and hope for the best. I feel like when this is your child or your spouse, that's unacceptable.
Correct.
You're like, there's got to be something more than that.
Absolutely. Amber, my last question for you. What future projects or new directions are you most excited about for your channel or for your work?
Well, this past year, I created an AI version of myself. So it's called Amber AI. And it's trained on all of my content, all of my writings, my videos, my courses. And so people can interact with Amber AI anytime, day or night. And it's kind of like talking to Chat GPT or Claude or something like that. But this is specifically trained on my philosophies. And so when you talk to Amber AI, you're going to get told, just like if you were talking to me. She's just like me, only she's smarter. I don't remember everything I've ever said, and she does. So I feel like it's exciting. I actually use Amber AI a lot myself. So I love it.
Amazing. And on that note, Amber, I just want to say what an amazing conversation this has been. I mean, you understand that subject so well. You give us some incredible pointers on addiction and recovery. And what came through so strongly was the compassion and the empathy that you obviously have for not just your clients, but not just people in recovery, but the entire subject that you said you started getting interested in because you became an intern at a very young age. Yeah. But thank you again for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Thank you, Ash.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.